On the build show today, ATTICS. Crappy, decent, and awesome. You know, it's honestly not that big a deal to go from crappy to decent. I'm going to show you how, and this is a little bit building science training, a little bit rant, so buckle up for that. And then as we get a little towards the end, I'm going to show you how to go from a decent attic to a pretty awesome attic. And again, it's not that heavy of a lift. If you have the knowledge, it is more money, but it's a much, much better awesome. Today's build show all about attics. Let's get going. Okay, y'all, got a little presentation on my iPad, which is mainly photos. Let's go into a typical attic. You know, you go through that attic door, whether it's a pull-down stair or a door, and what do you find up there in these attics? We find this. This happens to be a, I don't know, 60s or 70s house. You've got the insulation right on top of the wallboard, the sheetrock, whatever your ceiling is. And then fast forward to another decade or two, maybe we've got a radiant barrier like you're seeing here in the roof. But it's basically all the same thing. Now, when I started building houses in 1995, this is actually a house that I was building back then. I digitized this photo. That's why it's so tiny here. But, you know, this is how I was building, gosh, almost 30 years ago now. 1995, believe it or not, was 30 years ago. I'm getting old. This house, same technology, same attic, same air barrier, which is the ceiling drywall and then blown in, being built 10 miles from my studio here in Austin, Texas. It's crazy to me how we've hardly changed the way we build attics in literally decades. Now check this out. This is a production builder house, and the way that you know this is a vented attic is, see these right here? These are air hawks is typically what they're referred to as, and there's some type of soffit vent that you really can't see here that's allowing airflow in here, and then it's exhausting out of that air hawk. So this is a ventilated attic, meaning it's just like you saw in those photos prior, where you've got the fluffy stuff up there and then there's some ventilation in that attic space. Now, there are a couple things going for ventilated attics, and that's why they're honestly still really common today. The biggest thing going, of course, for them, though, this is the least cost way to build a house. It's also, frankly, a pretty durable way, though. I mean, if you think about that house with the air hawks here, if water were to leak in that air hawk, or we had a storm and a roof leak happened, as long as it's a small amount of water that gets in, actually that attic can probably dry and not have any problems. The crazy part to me, though, is that we would buy a brand new awesome car, and yet what if I had the same exact technology and that car was built the way it was 50 years ago? This is the part that really gets me to go, all right, just because it still works, does that mean it's the best way, and should we be building that way? Here's actually my old house. This is a 1970s house that I remodeled, and here's what it looked like for many years where I lived in that house. Now, you're going to notice in this attic, this is a southern house, and in fact, most of my photos here are going to be Texas. This video is actually a little more interesting to southern U.S. builders, because what you're seeing here is there's attic ductwork. There's AC and heat ducts up in that attic space. Now, below that attic space, in a multitude of houses that you and I are seeing, what do we have? We've got all kinds of things. We've got can lights just pockmarked everywhere in houses, maybe smoke detectors, and of course we've got AC registers as well, and that may be coming from that duct which is in that attic space. So, what do we do to kind of make that a air barrier? Downstairs inside the house, we caulked those ducts. You know, we're using some big stretch in this photo. This is actually at my house. We're caulking those so that there isn't any communication between that vented hot attic space and the space below. But why do we even have ducts to begin with up there? It's because of this right here. Most Texas houses are slab on grade, meaning we don't have basements like you northerners do to put your AC equipment. And because we're slab on grade, all of our equipment, instead of being down in the basement, is up in the attic. That's really the only space we typically have to run these, or at least that's the easy space that we have. So that's where we run our ductwork. And most Texas attics, southern attics, they look like this, just ductwork everywhere. spidering all through this space. Let's take a look at a line drawing of a house, and let's think about what is it about this space, and does this kind of building science make sense for us? So here we go. Typical house. This is your air barrier right here for the house. This is where you live. And we're doing everything we can to kind of seal up this conditioned space of the house. On the other hand, this space up here in the attic, this is unconditioned space. And Texas attics, believe it or not, do often get to those crazy numbers up there. 130 degrees is a pretty average summertime attic temperature. It's also typically pretty dang humid up in attics, especially if it's humid outside. What else do we have going on? We've got the sun's radiation heating that space and making that hotter. And then this is the part that drives me crazy, is now we've got our AC right here. This is our air conditioner making cold air, and then sending that cold air through our duct system, which happens to be running through that crazy hot space, and then pulling a return out of that space, bringing that air back up in, and we've got this kind of flow going, and all our air is pumping through that crazy hot oven of an attic. And what else happens when that air pumps through there? We have some loss. These little squiggly lines are meant to kind of represent duct loss. Even a really good modern install with a good crew is going to see an average of 5% duct loss. Older houses have 20 or 30% duct loss, and I suspect production builder type houses are between 5 and 10% duct loss, which means that air that I've paid money to cool is being lost to my attic. What else does that mean? That means that my house is under a negative pressure, meaning when I lose air up here to this attic space from leakage, air's got to come back into the house from somewhere. Where does it come in? It may come in underneath my bottom plate of my framing. It may leak in through my windows. It also may leak in around my ductwork. You saw that photo earlier of trying to caulk and seal that space, but a lot of houses don't have that sealed, so it's coming in there. I've seen a bunch of houses that have whole house attic fans. Those are crazy leaky. This house is under negative pressure because the HVAC system is in an unconditioned space outside of the envelope. What can we do about that? Of course, like I said earlier, we can seal those ducts, but there's all kinds of problems we find with ducts that are outside of the conditioned space. Here's just one example. We pulled that register off and look at all the mold growth around there because that register is getting moisture, condensation on it because it's a hot space. The other thing we find up in typical attics is this. This is me taking a picture on my phone one day, looking down at my boots like, oh boy, what are those? We all know what we're looking at right here, some Victor rat traps. And that ductwork is going through this crazy hot space with maybe rats running around here. Let's fast forward to this. I bought a house across the street from my current house. This is now 3 years ago, and built a new house over there. But when I was figuring out what shape this 70s house was in, I popped up into the attic with my home performance contractor. This is Sean Harris with Positive Energy. Let's cut to that footage. All right, Sean, how's it look up there, buddy?
It's looking hot at the moment, Matt. I'm looking around at some gray Mylar flecks up here.
There's a cut on that cheese box. What's up with that?
Yeah, obviously some previous person came in to inspect and they didn't seal it back. This is terrible. Duct leakage. Basically, you've got cold air coming out of these unsealed seams, and that's going to cause all sorts of issues. Not to mention humidity. So it's so humid up here right now.
Yes, it is.
80, 90 degree dew points, and all that moisture is going to go straight in here, and then you can get moldy ducts.
Okay, so ridiculously hot, but Sean, in that corner of the cheese box, found this.
You should come check this out.
What are you finding, man? That sounds bad.
Yeah, not great.
What do you got?
So it looks like some rat droppings
gross.
And maybe some liquid in there.
Oh man, the rats are running in the ducts, aren't they?
They are.
Oh, look at that duct board. It's stained in there.
Yep.
That's disgusting. Oh, dude, I've got rats in these ducts, don't I?
Yeah, it looks that way.
Man, I can't salvage these. I gotta rip these out. And here's a photo of that. This house 70s house, very typical for Texas. At one point had major rats all over. And that was my experience across the street as well. I got roof rats in, and it was really hard for me to get them out. I did all kinds of solutions to get them out. Here's another example from my old house as well. It's not just small furry animals, it's big furry animals. I had a family of lemurs get in my attic, and they nested above my master bath. And I made a video about replacing my roof and putting in attic baffles that I didn't have on the 70s house. But check this out. Those lemurs got in and chewed up the ductwork around the AC boot coming into my master bathroom. And I could hear them when I'd get up in the middle of the night if I went to the bathroom. They were scratching and chewing. They were smart enough to tear up that duct, and it's a little hard to tell here, but there was a big hole in that duct right here, and they had AC blowing right into their wonderful little nest space for their new babies, for their new baby lemurs. And that attic was so tight that I had to get a hole cut out of the attic. Luckily, I was re-roofing to get Jeff, my AC guy, in there to redo the ducts and fix that, and then put those baffles in. As you can see, Jeff's above the top of the trusses. That's where the plywood would go. So that was not easy. Why are we doing it that way? Let's take a step back and let's look at the science behind how houses are built. There's really three things that houses do for us. They provide structure, right? And most structure in American houses is wood framed. There's some amount of control that a house does, and the control layer is outside of the structure. And when we thought about control layers in the past, we're thinking about house wraps, in particular water control. And then on top of that is some type of cladding, which serves the protection function. Really, the cladding's main purpose is just to keep water off the structure and typically UV rays off those control layers. But what do our houses need to control beyond just rain? Our houses really need to control air as well. Because remember, anytime air leaks into a house, it's going to have bad things leaking in with it. It's going to have potentially pollen and mold spores and whatever else is in the outdoor air. And it's also going to bring a lot of humidity into our houses. I should have put this slide in, but this morning I was super hot when I got up from my workout this morning. And I took a little photo screenshot of the outdoor air. And check this out. Austin, Texas this morning. It was 74 degrees, but it was 92% humidity. The dew point this morning was 72 degrees. So any surface that was 72 degrees would have dew forming on it. Now think about if my house was built a little bit leaky and I had air leaking in under my bottom plates. If I had air leaking around my windows, around my electrical outlets, it's very likely that the drywall in my house would be 72 degrees. That's where I keep my thermostat. I actually keep it below that often, 71 or 70, which means that that hot, humid air hitting that dew point would form condensation. And that's how we get a lot of mold growth on the back of our drywall in our houses, is by that air leaking in. So it's not just rain that needs to be controlled on the outside, it's air. This is the part that's a little bit of an epiphany to me. I was visiting with Steve Basic this week, and Steve said something that I knew already, but the way he said it just really changed my thinking. You know, on typical houses like this one that I showed earlier, the air barrier is right here at the ceiling line. And then everything in the attic we're trying to seal out. What if our air barrier, though, was here and then transferred up to our roof line? We should be stopping the air and the water at that outside furthest envelope of the house. And if we did that, we'd be so much better off than using, for instance, the drywall as our air barrier on the inside of our houses. Now, let's move from crappy to decent. We've been doing crappy far too long. To get to a decent attic, it's really not that hard. We just need to change one thing. Instead of that insulation going right here at that ceiling line and being in this plane right there, we just need to instead put that insulation, actually let me switch to red here, right here at our roof line. And there's one really easy way to do that, and I'm going to show you that in a second, but here's what it does for us. It means that our air conditioning equipment now is within the air-conditioned space. And this attic may be slightly hotter because of the stack effect, because heat tends to rise. But in general, over the years that I've been doing conditioned attics now for 15 years, I don't find my attics hotter than maybe 3 or 4 degrees up here compared to the rest of the house. Which also means if these ducts are leaking some air here, why do we care? Because it's being leaked into the conditioned space, and I'm not putting my house in a position where the house goes negative, right? This is all in the same pressure boundary on the house. That is really cool. Easiest way to do that is with open cell spray foam. If you're in the south, now if you're in the north, you want to think about using closed cell, but in the south, this is how it gets done all day long. Expensive builders, not very expensive builders, even production builders these days are moving to this. I've been doing this for 15 years, and I would consider this a decent attic. The HVAC equipment is in that space. We don't see as much critter activity as a unconditioned attic space, although we have to be a little cautious. We also really want to do a blower door test to make sure that we've gotten it. Open cell foam is pretty darn affordable in most places, but it's not perfect. And here's an example of that. Here's a house I built 5-6 years ago when I was still using traditional house wraps. And traditional house wraps work great. I built lots and lots of houses with it and have had no problems with them. It really manages water well. But let's look at this area right here. This is a front porch area where these rafters on this porch roof are penetrating the envelope. Let's zoom in a little bit. Oh, before I do that, I do want to mention in that carport space, you can start to see we've got other areas that house wrap doesn't need water protection, but how am I going to get that airflow stopped through these spaces? Okay, now back to the porch. Here's the porch. Check this out. My frame carpenter did an awesome job of cutting that house wrap, toothing in. I'm not sure that he necessarily needed to do that, considering we had a nice big overhang here and a giant overhang here. We're well protected from water. But what does that house wrap not do for me? It doesn't protect me from air. So now if I'm using closed cell foam on the inside, that closed cell foam is going to seal up these areas, right? Well, prior to this house, I'd done another house where I didn't do any kind of prep or pre-work. I let the open cell foam contractor come in and spray foam the whole house. And you know what I found? I found that it worked, but it didn't work as awesome as I was expecting. That the air tightness level just wasn't there. I want to say that house blew something around 2.5 or 2.7 ACH 50, which meets code even in the north and certainly meets code in the south, but wasn't all that great. So open cell foam and even closed cell foam, we have to be cautious because it is a little bit of mixing chemistry on site, and small imperfections in the application mean that sometimes it'll shrink back from the studs that it's sticking to. The other thing is open cell foam. I wish I had an example of it here. If I were to push my hand into open cell foam, it would go right in and I could pull a chunk out, no problem. So think about if you are a mouse or a rat or even a cockroach, and you've got a space right here that's filled with open cell foam, which is not even as durable as a kitchen sponge. It's a really easy material. You could tunnel through it. You could burrow through it. You could chew through it pretty darn easily. And that blower door score of 2.7 that I had on a house similar to this one with full envelope open cell foam got me thinking, I need to pay attention to these details and think about not just relying on the spray foam to seal, but I need to do some other pre-work. And the best time to visit the house is when it's bright sunlight outside, because you can see these cracks on the inside from a mile away when it's bright sunlight. Don't visit at the end of the day or beginning of the morning. You want to come when it's real bright sun, preferably angling towards those cracks as much as possible. Here's what I've gone to for the houses that I do with open cell foam. I've gone to a pre-foam routine. What you're seeing here, this black stuff, this is canned foam, you know, the kind that you're going to buy at the home center or at, you know, they sell it at the counter at Builder's First Source where I shop. That foam, anytime you find foam in a can, is closed cell foam, much more durable. You can't put your finger into it as easily. You can still damage it, don't get me wrong, but it's much more durable. And I try to get a different color than the spray foam as well, so this happens to be black. You can't always do that. But what you're seeing here is we've gone through and pre-foamed. Now this piece up here is actually unnecessary. I don't know if I did this or someone else did, but that wasn't necessary here, I wouldn't say. But these areas, picture framing inside that entire bay right here with foam, getting that whole area all pre-foamed, that's really important, because now I've got in that gap, which in this case was something like a 1/2 inch or so, now I've got some closed cell foam, so that when the foam contractor comes with the open cell foam, we're going to have a much better air seal. And this has become routine for us, where we pre-foam whenever we're going to be using open cell foam, whether it's stud bays, whether it's rafter bays, or whatever. And this leads ultimately to a pretty darn decent attic without that much expense, just a little bit more thought. I mean, ultimately the framing on this house is no different than the standard framed house that anybody's building. It is a little bit more money in this case to use, for instance, open cell foam and to do that pre-foaming routine, but you're yielding much better benefits. This is a really decent attic. A little better, bordering on awesome, is closed cell foam. Closed cell foam, by its very nature of being closed cell, rigid, much higher R value per inch. I consider this a tool in my toolbox that helps me wherever I've got problem areas. For instance, you know, this attic right here with these random knee walls on the left that would have been really hard to insulate with, let's say, standard bat insulation. These wide 24-inch on center truss bays, these would have been hard to do with, you know, rock wool or some other insulation. So I'm trying to upgrade wherever possible in my conditioned attics from open cell to closed cell. That's really my new standard. It makes for a really decent, bordering on awesome. You want to talk awesome though? Let's go to the next level up. And again, this isn't that much more expensive. It is more, but there's definitely more thought involved. That's where we're really taking seriously this air bearer on the outside of the building. And there's lots of ways to do it. We could use a full peel and stick like I did in this house. This actually happens to be a SIPS construction house that I did a couple years ago, and we used peel and stick from Dorkin. This is their Delta Vent SA, standing for self-adhering. If you like, oh, by the way, that was OSB sheathing, which works great. If you like plywood, which I do often on my modern builds, I'll sheathe the house in plywood, and again, I'll use a peel and stick. But especially on modern builds where I have no overhangs, I really like to kick it up a notch and go to the most bomber water and air barrier that I've found. Now remember, this is a southern U.S. Thing though. This is climate zones 1, 2, and 3. This is Alumiflash by Polyguard. I want to say they call it Alumiflash Plus or something like that now. These are some old photos of it. But this is a very thick, I want to say 40 mil thick, peel and stick that has an aluminum facer on the outside. You can see here, it'll stick even to soffit areas right here. You're seeing that stick underneath upside down because we use a primer. It's also sticking to metal, like on these metal columns. It's really an incredible product. And they've got a fluid applied. Oops, I scrolled past it. They've got a fluid applied that goes with it. I should switch to blue here since we're talking about blue barrier. And you can see where that peel and stick came up to those rafters. Unlike that house wrap that I couldn't seal to the rafters, fluid applied won't stick to standard house wrap. This blue barrier sticks perfectly to the aluminum on the aluminum facer of this Alumiflash. It's also sticking perfectly to the wood. So we've gone around and picture framed and stitched the seams on the whole outside. And now, before I do anything on the inside, this is a really tight house. This is a great way to go. And there's the same house on the backside. Let's talk about my house though. When we think about awesome, when we go to that, how could we get this even better? Here's how to do it. And I've made several videos on my house under construction. Check out my videos called Monopoly Framing. I'm going to spend a minute or two on that. But my house looks like a pretty, traditional house. I've got hardy plank. I've got brick. I've got a Sheffield metal roof with 2-foot overhangs. But I built my house a little bit differently, and this is the part where thought needs to come in ahead of time. This isn't just hire a different installation crew. and instead of doing blown in, do spray in. This is really thought. I was trying to avoid spray foam in my house as much as possible. I also wanted the tightest seal possible. I didn't want lemurs in my attic. I didn't want rats. I did not want cockroaches like I had in my old house. And I didn't want my pest control guy up in my attic every 60 days spraying or dusting or doing whatever that happens all over Texas. So I said, look, I'm going to really pay attention to the water and air seal at my house. And as a result, by the way, I've had an amazing bug seal. I haven't seen a single bug inside my house in 18 months. Don't sell your clients on that because they can still get in somehow. But what I did was I went to the nth degree to make sure that I didn't have that problem. So here's my house under construction. Same house as here. This portion right here on my house is 1 story. And this portion is 2 story. So with that being said, let me show you what that looks like. So here's that same 1 story portion. Now I framed this traditionally. You could use trusses. We use a lot of BFS trusses on our jobs too, but I do like standard rafters. So you're seeing these rafters here are bearing from the outside wall here to this ridge beam. And what do you notice on the edge of these rafters? They're all clipped right here. They're clipped at the wall line. And on this picture of my upper attic up here, same thing. This rafter coming down is clipped. And then my framer ran my zip system sheathing all the way to the top. And this piece of zip isn't on yet. But you can see here, this will be able to run past the double top plate and run to the very tip or top of that rafter. What does that buy us? That buys us an incredible water and air and vapor barrier on the outside of my house, where I spent a fair amount of time and effort sealing at the base of the house. We're not quite done here. You can see not all the tape's on. But we also were able to just simply use some zip system sheathing tape between the wall sheathing right here and the roof sheathing where they touched, which means that I have no ventilation in my attic. I also didn't have to go through and take care of miles of cracks with canned foam or worry about whether it was going to get sealed with either open cell or closed cell. My house, once this framing was done and my windows were in, was tight as a drum from an air perspective, which, by the way, means it's really tight from a bug perspective as well. And then on the outside of my house, here's where I spent a little extra time and effort. I did 2 layers of polyiso on my rooftop deck. You can see here, there's 2 layers of foam right there. And then what I did was I put an over roof on. I basically made a SIPS roof in the field where I used these right here, which happens to be basically a 2x4 sized LVL, which run way up onto the roof deck, and then we're fastened down up there to create an overhang. And then I've got 2 inches of polyiso in the walls, and it's a little hard to see, but I've got 4 inches right there on the roof deck. And then I sheathed it with another layer of zip system sheathing. So when you look at this picture now, this whole roof section here is basically a site-built SIPS. I put an umbrella on the house. Now you could have omitted that, and check out my old videos on a house I call the perfect wall house, which is what this Monopoly framing was originally coined as by Joe Stiebrick. That house, I didn't do the overhangs. I didn't spend that on, but I wanted my house to look more traditional. And this leads to where we are today, which is the awesome attic. My attic has no spray foam in it. I was able to frame the roof in a way that fit perfectly with my R30 bats from Rockwool. I've got R30 bats on the inside, and I've got 4 inches of foam times R7. I've got R20-ish on the roof. So I've got an R50 roof system now for insulation purposes, but I've also got just wonderful storage space. This is, here's the pro photo. Here's my photo this morning that I took. We've got a little bit more junk in there, don't judge me. But again, this is all in the conditioned space. This is a wonderful, wonderful attic. Of course, I could have figured out a way to put drywall up there, but I needed the storage. Again, we're slab on grade, so I don't have that basement. This is, in effect, my basement. It's just on the top of my house rather than under my house. Here's another one, though. This is being done by lots and lots of people. The guy on the left there in the purple shirt is an architect in town who built his own house. This is Trey Farmer right here. And I did a video with him a couple years ago at his awesome attic, built the exact same way as mine. All rock wool on the inside, amazing space for his top-notch mechanicals. He just did a great job on this house. With that being said, let's take a quick tour of the 2 attic spaces in my house. So this door right here leads to really my son's Lego playroom. I've got an 11-year-old that I'm hoping will join me in the business. He's really interested in Legos, and so you're seeing a lot of those Legos in the foreground here. But check out the space. It's tiny. You know, that pitch in that roof I wish was a little taller, but it didn't quite work with the architecture. But you can see all that equipment, all that ductwork, same condition space. That door leading to that space, no air seal on that door, no insulation necessary. And yes, there's some of my family's junk up there, but there's not rat droppings. There's no rat traps. There's no chance of raccoons or other things getting in here. This is part of the conditioned space. And the same goes for my attic. You know, I do have a super cool pull down stair, but you could use a really inexpensive pull down, non-insulated stair to get to an attic like this. And think how cool that would be for you or for your clients to have an awesome attic and not just a decent attic. I've got no spray foam. As I said earlier, spray foam is a tool in my tool belt. I use it when I need it. But if I can avoid it and I can build better without it, I think that's a better choice for me. And as we think about the crappy attic versus the really awesome attic, remember we said earlier, was the crappy attic durable and cheap? Yes. Was it healthy? No. Was it efficient? No. My house is the exact opposite. My house has been really, really healthy. I have absolutely loved living there. Very efficient. There's a couple things I'd do differently on the efficient front. I'll save that for another video. But the drywall in my house at the ceiling or on the walls is not the air barrier. My air barrier is on the outside of the house. It's that zip system sheathing that I really spent the time and effort on to make sure it was both water and airtight. And for me, that's made a giant difference for my family. You know, I didn't show all the pictures that I could have of crappy attics, but I've been in crazy multi-million-dollar houses in Austin, Texas. I've even been in a celebrity's house who lives here in Austin, and they have crappy attics. And I can't fathom why we are not doing at least decent as a standard and awesome as an option, or awesome all the time attics. It's really not that hard. It's really not that expensive. We have to think about it ahead of time. We've talked to our architect. We have to design it, and we have to build it better. But, you know, if you look at my house, none of the materials were crazy. I have, yes, I did use some cooler LVL studs, but I could have very easily used standard lumber, standard trusses, all right out of the yard at Builder's First Source, zip system sheathing, which is available, or I showed you some peel and stick options as well out there if you want to use something else. All that's totally doable. It's really about thought and care ahead of time, which led to a house that was insulated by a really, you know, straightforward rock wool crew. You know, all my inside stud bays and my rafters, they did that whole insulation job in one day with rock wool, which is a very inert, normal product. I also like that when I go up in my attic, I'm not wearing a dust mask. Crappy attics, it doesn't take me very long at all in that attic to start hacking. And once I get that in my lungs, I feel it the whole rest of the day. On the other hand, my pull-down stairs that you saw a second ago, or my automatic stairs, I should say, when those come down, my attic's just like the rest of my house. I absolutely love it. Guys, hopefully you learned something today. If you want more of this nerdy building science talk, I'll put a playlist of 2 or 3 other videos that are similar to this so you can learn more about this topic. And stay tuned. I do want to tease something for you. My buddy Steve Basic and I have a series we're filming in June called Building Science 101. It's going to be free to you. It's going to be, I can't remember if it's 11 or 12 parts, but several parts, many, many hours, really going to go over the basics of building science. So if this video appealed to you and your nerdy side of how do houses work, why do they function, why have we built this way, and what's the better way to do it, what's the more durable, the more healthy, the more efficient way to build things, that's really what we're all about here at the Build Show. And if you're not familiar, I have a website we started 3 years ago called buildshownetwork.com. All my videos are on there, plus I have 11 other builders, tradesmen and women, and an architect, Steve Basic, shooting videos almost every single week on their job sites. Sign up for our newsletter in the description below. And of course, hit subscribe if you're watching this on YouTube. Guys, follow us on TikTok or Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on The Build Show.